And the topic for today is something that really fascinates me for the last couple of years since I've been, you know, reading into this stuff. And it's the topic of early Christianity and how they viewed the Old Testament God. Some of you might not realize this, but the earliest Christians that we know about didn't all agree on who the Old Testament God was, what his role was, and so there's a couple of groups that come to mind. We might talk about more groups as well. But Marcion is this early Christian writer who, if I'm not mistaken, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just going to tell you what I think. It seems that he thought the Old Testament God was evil. To some other these Christian groups that had similar views.
Well, I think before we get to Marcion, let's just take a step back and draw a bit of the context for this, because the context for this is really setting the stage for all the figures that we'll talk about. So first of all, Christianity wants to appear intellectual. It takes on all the intellectual repertoire of its time, and in its time the dominant philosophy was Platonism. And so Christians, they didn't want to portray themselves as believing in fables and in conflicted and morally problematic depictions of God. They wanted God to be unchangeable, to be everlasting, to be full of wisdom, to be unknown, to be transcendent, to be hypercosmic, that is, transcending the world, and to, most importantly, be good, and to have no question about the fundamental goodness of God ever at any time. And so these are the fundamental traits of Platonism. Platonism and Christianity join forces, and they really never stopped joining forces, because even today, all Christians will insist that their God is good and only good, and is somehow transcending this world. Those are not inherently biblical ideas. There's no point where you'll be flipping through, the Bible, or say, the Hebrew Bible, and you'll find, God is transcendent. You'll never find that as a doctrine. Okay, that's Platonism that has been worked into Christianity like leaven. Okay, and has inflated the dough.
I want to
Sure.
just to add to what you say real quick, and then I want to continue with what your thought was. But I noticed this recently while I was looking at a Wikipedia page for some of these high-level bishops in Rome, in the Roman Catholic Church, and it says, I'm showing it on the screen as I say this, Roman Catholic, and then it says philosophy, Neoplatonist. So some of these Roman Catholics are like self-professed Neoplatonists in 2023 right now. Just wanted to throw that out there to add to what you're saying.
Yeah, you've had with Pope Benedict the 16th, he made an official statement on this, that Christianity and Platonism have joined hands, and have always been the two constituent elements in what became Christian theology. And in the second century, it's no different. So when you're a Platonist, the very first thing you do, in the most widely read and the most popular text ever in antiquity, it wasn't the Apology of Socrates, it wasn't the Phaedrus with its wonderful image of the soul as a chariot, it wasn't the Symposium where you have the drinking party and speeches about love. It was the Timaeus, which is Plato's creation story. And in that creation story, he distinguishes God as the good from the creator, who is a lower being, who is also good, because the creator is a perfect manifestation of the good. And the creator, also known as the demiurge, but it's the same word, demiurgos, just translates as creator. This creator creates the best of all possible worlds, which is our world, and does his best to conform our world to the good and to the eternal thoughts of God, the eternal forms, as Plato thought of them. So already Christians are dealing with a scenario in which there is not a split in the Godhead, but a distinction. That is, a distinction between the ultimate and transcendent God and God's manager. Okay. And God's manager is the creator. And in Platonism, there's no hint that the creator is bad. In fact, that would be quite wrong-headed. But there are, or there were in the universe, it wasn't just Christians, it was all people who acknowledged that the middle management class of deity, which is called the daimones, okay, or the daimons, these could be good or evil. And the daimones took control of the nations. And so each nation had its own daimon, its own sponsor, as it were, sort of much more like I was going to say mascot, but much more than that. The daimon is the leading force and protector of that nation. And we see this idea back in Deuteronomy where, that all the 70 nations of the world are given 70 different angels to be their manager. But the angel given to Israel is Yahweh himself. And later, the angel given to Israel is depicted as Michael. That's in the book of Daniel. But anyway, this idea of angelic rulers of the nations, or daimonic rulers of the nations, this is a fundamental idea. And they observed this because, when you went to different regions of the world, different cities or city-states would worship different deities. So Athens obviously has Athena as their daimonic protectress, and other city-states will have different gods in charge. Obviously, in Egypt there's Isis and Osiris, and in Rome there is the Olympian Zeus, or the Capitoline Zeus, and you could go anywhere. And the way that Christians kind of thought of this is that the gods of the nations, they are real, but they represent these middle management level of deity, and not all of them are good. In fact, as Christians later concluded, none of them are good. Now, with this basic idea, some Christians who were not Jewish by lineage or by practice, that is, they didn't practice circumcision or kashrut or any of the other purity laws, they viewed the God of Judea, that is the nation of Judea, the nation of the Jews, in much the same way as they would have viewed the gods of Athens or of Rome or of Alexandria or what have you, that is, as a middle management being. And this particular middle management being, by the name of Yahweh, or as the Greeks said it, Yahweh, this God had that same ambiguity, because when you learn about this God, it looks very different than the Platonic good, right? The Platonic good doesn't change and is unambiguously good and only does benefits for people. He doesn't curse anybody.
And Plato says he can't be jealous.
He cannot be jealous.
Which is
Yeah,
a specific thing in the Old Testament that he says, "I'm the jealous God." I always found that.
Yeah. So the famous line in Plato and from the Phaedrus is there is no jealousy in the divine choir. That is, no God, if it is a God, can be jealous, because the idea of a jealous God simply does not make logical and philosophical sense, because God needs nothing, therefore has no desire for anything else. If jealousy then is the desire for someone else's property or characteristic, then QED, God cannot be jealous. Otherwise, if you say that God is jealous, you implicitly say that he needs something.
Wow.
But then that isn't God. That would be a lower middle management level of being who is jealous of the other nations, the other gods leading the other nations, Because when you think about it, Judea is a very small nation. Right. It always has been. And Israel today, it's not quite the size of New Jersey. It's a very small place.
Right.
So you can you can imagine a situation where the angels are competing with each other, and we see that again in the book of Daniel, where the archangel Michael, who's prince of Israel, is fighting with the prince of Persia. Well, who's the prince of Persia? Well, it's the angel in charge of Persia. They're jealous, and they have wars and fights. And when there's wars and fights today, like between Ukraine and Russia, the ancients would think of this as the angel of Russia versus the angel of Ukraine. And one angel is quite bigger and more arrogant than the other, and wants to pick on the other nation to gain more power. So these issues are sort of your bread and butter kind of philosophical interpretation of how to envision the world from a philosophical perspective. You view the gods as true beings, but on a middle management level. And the true God, who is the singular God, is outside of this world, above the gods, above the middle management level of the other beings called gods. And that God is perfectly good, unchanging, unjealous, unharmed by evil, not needing anything, etc., etc.